Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library, and I'm really excited to be here to be talking about 101 places in Boston that you must not miss with author Kim Windyka. We were going to have Heather Kapplow here, her co-author, but she was not able to make it. I believe she's in Norway, so I think she's got an out for sure. But before I get to Kim's presentation on this amazing topic that I can't wait to hear, I just wanted to say a couple of things. One is that I'd like to thank the Friends of the Ashland Library for supporting all of our programming. And I would also like to say that we are partnering with several libraries for this program. And so I'd like to welcome the patrons of Millis, Medway, and Stowe to our talk today. I'd also like to thank the Senior Center who has partnered with us on this program. They enjoy our daytime program, so I think they're going to really love this one. Kim does have a presentation and we will do a Q&A, so please put your questions in the Q&A and I will ask those of her right when she finishes her presentation. So you can just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. So without further ado, Kim Windyka fell in love with Boston while growing up in nearby southern New Hampshire and has never become tired of the city's beauty and historic charm in the 12 years she's been living there since attending Emerson College. And if you know anything of Emerson, it's like right in the center of the city. You can't throw a rock without hitting something interesting from there. So she knows what she talks about, 101 places that you must visit. So welcome, Kim. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Mina. Thank you for that introduction. As she mentioned, I'm unfortunately flying solo today. Heather, my co-author, is in Norway, but she's a visual artist. She does art installations that are amazing, and I believe that's why she's in Norway right now on a grant. And then Alyssa, our photographer, is a wedding photographer by day, but she took really amazing photos. And as for myself, I'm a longtime Boston area resident. I'm a full-time copywriter and then a freelance travel, humor, and feature writer. This book was a true team effort. So I just want to shout out my co-author and photographer first. And we can get started with the presentation.
Okay, just give me 1 second to set it up. Are we good?
We're good. And you can actually go through the first couple slides. I've introduced us. There we go. So the first thing I want to touch on, the book actually finally came out last year in 2021, but the whole process, as I was just telling Mina, began back in 2018, and the bulk of the writing of the guidebook took place during kind of the height of the COVID lockdowns, which was very unfortunate timing, to say the least. But at first, while it was a major challenge getting in touch with the places we wanted to feature, getting photos, obviously, one silver lining is that kind of initially, after the initial period when people kind of settled into the new normal, people were definitely more present, and kind of the owners of the businesses were able to speak to us and do phone interviews. And Alyssa was able to arrange for them to let her in to take photos, even though the businesses were closed. So it actually ended up being ultimately kind of a saving grace. So that was good. And, despite the strangeness of the time in which we wrote the book, we're very proud of the final product. It focuses on close to home adventures and local small businesses who still need our support. And especially when it first came out, people were starting to venture out a little more, but still wanted to stay close to home. So I feel like it's really a testament to how much fun there is to be had in Boston, that even beyond shops and restaurants, but just really interesting stories around the city. You can go on to the next slide. And so I'll just start by talking about some of them. We've kind of grouped them into categories, highlighting some different groups of things that we think are particularly interesting. One of which is the chunk of the Berlin Wall, which is it's a full panel that's on free display. It's over at the Halt International Business School outside of it in Cambridge. That's owned by EF Education First. But this was a good example of being able to get an inside story. I talked to an employee there, and she kind of told me the whole story behind why this chunk of the Berlin Wall is there. EF originally had an office in West Germany for many years, and they opened an office in East Berlin the day after the Berlin Wall came down. So the piece was actually presented to EF founder, his name was Bertil Halt, at his 50th birthday party. And so it kind of serves as a reminder, especially since it's an international business school and EF is a travel and educational company. It's a reminder of like breaking down cultural and geographical barriers to spark mutual understanding. And so the chunk of the wall really symbolizes that for them, which is obviously something you might not know just looking at it. Another interesting one featured in the picture here is the Jamaica Plain Taco Bench, which it was an art installation by a local artist named Matthew Hinsman. And it's kind of easy to walk by and miss. It's right kind of smack dab in the middle of the other benches around Jamaica Pond. And it originally just kind of started as a little bit of a joke or a prank that the artist thought was funny, just to see if he could get people to notice this taco shaped bench that you can't really sit in unless you fold yourself up, but it makes for a good photo op. And it was originally only supposed to be there for a short time, but he kind of convinced, I guess, the powers that be around Jamaica Pond to let him keep it there. And so you can go go sit in it and take some photos now. And then there's also a sacred cod in the Massachusetts State House, which we thought this was kind of one of the weirdest things we discovered in doing research for the book. It's supposed to be a statement to public servants to remind them of the importance of cod fishery. And it's been there since the 1700s. It's been replaced twice. It's been kidnapped by the folks at the Harvard Lampoon, which is another place in the book, as a prank, but it's made it through it all, and it's like a very important piece of the State House. It's 5 foot long, bronze or gold, I forget which metal, but it's just a really strange thing to find in the State House. And then finally, the skull of Phineas Gage, whom you may have heard the name, but I'm just going to quickly read the chapter here because it's pretty short and it's a really interesting story. So the next time you complain about having a bad day, think of poor Phineas Gage, a railroad construction worker who endured the unfortunate experience of having an iron rod completely penetrate his skull, and he lived to tell the tale. While working on the Rutland and Burlington Railroad in Vermont, Gage was preparing to blast some rock, a process that involves sprinkling gunpowder into holes and tamping it down with said rod. Distracted by workers behind him, Gage turned his head. There's never been a verified account of exactly what happened to set it off, but the explosive powder ignited and sent the tamping iron hurtling through the foreman's cheekbone and through his skull. Shockingly, he never lost consciousness during the incident and was stable enough to stand up and settle into an ox cart for the trip to a nearby town. Reportedly, Gage joked with his doctor, "Here's business enough for you." Sadly, things were never quite the same for Gage after that fateful day in 1848. Though he survived, the 27-year-old was rendered blind in his left eye, and his brain's left frontal lobe was severely damaged, transforming his personality for the remaining 12 years of his life. Many reported that the once hardworking, responsible man became gross, profane, coarse, and vulgar. His friends described the new Phineas as no longer Gage. Later, it's believed that his temperament began to even out and his social skills began to return. His fascinating story has been the subject of intense scrutiny in the medical community for decades, particularly in the field of neuroscience, the topic of cerebral localization and the influence of brain on one's personality and behavior. The skull and the tamping iron came to Boston in 1868 when Gage's former doctor, John Martin Harlow, donated them to the Warren Anatomical Museum in the County Library, where it sits today. So I just think it's just really interesting story. Obviously, I'd heard of Phineas Gage prior to writing the book, but Did not know the entire story, and it's a sad story, but interesting that you can go see the skull there today. So we can move on to the next slide. Okay, and obviously there are plenty of places in Boston to celebrate with the holidays coming up. I guess mid-year graduations from school. So for whatever the reason, we highlighted a few or a handful of different places to celebrate. So so this one for Bully Boy, this is another one I will share the chapter with you. Okay, and sadly their cocktail garden just, I think, closed for the season, but it's great in the spring and summer to have a drink outdoors there. Okay. In a city full of breweries, Roxbury's Bully Boy Distillers shows some much deserved love to whiskey, rum, gin, vodka, and Amaro. Brothers Will and Dave Willis established their craft distillery, Boston's first, in 2010, inspired by their childhood on a fourth-generation working farm in Sherborne, Mass. Initially, the two brewed cider, eventually moving on to brandy and other spirits. Their passion was further nurtured when they discovered a hidden vault in the basement of the farmhouse. It was here that they found not only a secret world of forgotten booze, but also came up with a name for the distillery. Along with all kinds of liquor was a perplexing plaque dedicated to one of the horses on the farm named Bully Boy. The brothers did a bit of investigating and found out two things. One, that their great-grandfather was good friends with Teddy Roosevelt. Two, that the horse's moniker stemmed from one of Teddy Roosevelt's favorite expressions, bully, which they learned was a synonym for extraordinary. Once the name was decided, they built the brand from the ground up, going door to door at bars and meticulously monitoring their product for taste and quality, a process that continues today. It paid off. After a handful of years in their original location, Bully Boy moved into its current 8,000 square foot space across the street in 2015. They offer public tours that let you see exactly how the magic happens and catch a glimpse of the two massive stills where the gin and everything else is stored. There's also a stylish tasting room with a full bar complete with flights of old fashions, Moscow mules, and daiquiris, plus specialty drinks like Don't Call Me Shirley and Wheezy's Sipper. Want to try your own hand at mixology? Take a class with one of the expert bartenders who will share skills that you can keep in your back pocket for whenever a martini craving hits. And that's another thing I would like to try. I haven't tried any of the cocktail classes there, but they look really, really cool. And then there's also float, I don't have float in here. The Liberty Hotel. So this luxury hotel was actually originally a jail built in 1851, and it housed everyone from Malcolm X to Sacco and Vanzetti, if you've heard of them. But overcrowding and substandard conditions forced it to close in 1973. But it was finally emptied in 1990 and sat vacant for more than 10 years. Which is kind of crazy thinking about the real estate in Boston. It was finally purchased by Mass General Hospital, and renovations began with doors opening finally in 2007. But the coolest part for me about the Liberty is that it hasn't really forgotten its roots. They preserved a lot of the architectural elements, like the beautiful atrium and the cupola. And all of the bars and restaurants in the hotel are kind of playful nods to its former life. Like one is named Clink, another called Alibi. And so it's just kind of a fun little nod to the history of the place. And I do want to talk about float, even though it's not on this list, it used to be. But it's an interesting little spot in Medford that is sort of a massage alternative. It's basically, you get into a little pod with, it's like almost like an therapeutic Epsom salt bath of sorts. And it can be great if you just want to relax, kind of if you have any pain that you're dealing with. It's just kind of an out of the ordinary place to visit. And it's, a little outside the city, but worth a visit for sure. And then the People's Karaoke is another one that they've started up again. They were obviously not doing karaoke during the height of the pandemic, but it's a kind of roving karaoke night. This host named Sparky, he goes to different bars, and he has kind of a dedicated following of karaoke singers that, you know, will follow him around town. So it's definitely, he is a great MC and has a great songbook. And it's just kind of a really interesting, fun way to spend an evening. So we can go on the next slide. Okay. There's also plenty of shops and really interesting boutiques in Boston. So 40 South Street, this was another one that I was able to talk to the owner. I actually used to live in JP. It's right on South Street. Obviously, the address is the name. I was able to talk to the owner, Hilken Mancini, via phone during the lockdown, and she kind of gave me the background of the store. It's a vintage clothing store, and I'll just share the chapter with you because it's a really cool story. Punks, hipsters, and lovers of funky secondhand fashion, take heed. This tiny boutique, owned by local rocker and Renaissance woman Hilken Mancini, is jam-packed with hand-picked, one-of-a-kind vintage styles that are just begging to be worn on stage or your next album cover. From retro graphic tees to disco-inspired dresses and chic blazers, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, give or take a decade on either side, are alive and well on the racks here. The store existed as a shop called Gumshoe for years before being transformed into a treasure chest of co-ed clothing, shoes, and accessories. It all began when Mancini, who's played in local bands like Fuzzy, the Monsieurs, and Shepherdess, crossed paths with Gumshoe owner Otto Johnson, a bartender at storied Boston club, the Rathskeller, aka the Rat. I'm not sure if anyone, I'm sadly too young to remember it, but I know many older Boston residents remember the Rat. Johnson was using the space above the club to sell pre-owned clothing, in addition to operating the space in Jamaica Plain, which was more of a warehouse than a store at the time. He was really only selling men's vintage out of there, Mancini recalls. There wasn't a dressing room or any track lighting or anything. The pair's rock and roll roots made them the perfect match, and they decided to join forces around 2005. He liked me because I was a musician who had just lost my record deal, and I was figuring out ways to make money, she explains. So I moved in and made it more of a store, and we split the rent. Since then, she's carved out a special space that fits right into the already artsy neighborhood. Aside from offering statement pieces and unique duds, 40 South Street doesn't just look the part. The lifestyle is in its DNA through and through. Mancini's the creator of punk rock aerobics and was a co-founder of the Girls Rock campaign, Boston, which provides music education and enrichment programs to the future Joan Jetts and Debbie Harrys of the world. So if you ever stop by there, she's always there. I think she's the only employee, and she's really great to have a conversation with. So definitely check out 40 South Street. I also wanted to highlight Formaggio Kitchen. This is a gourmet Cambridge cheese shop. It's also a longtime area favorite, but it was actually the first American retail shop to have its own aging cave, which is in the basement, obviously. And Formaggio is dedicated to the traditional cheesemongering experience, where staff provides personalized customer service in order to, help each person find the perfect cheese for them if they are hosting a dinner party or, just want to have a fun night at home with good cheese and wine. And if you're looking to learn more, you can also take one of the store's cheese classes. They also have events called Brave the Caves, where they actually, I think it's a tour of their cheese aging caves. So it's just a really, really cool spot. And then finally, Soa Vintage Market is one of my favorite places. I'm biased because I love vintage clothing, but they have a ton of vendors. This is around the same time as the Soa Open Market, if you've been there, but it's down in a basement, and they have everything from clothing to housewares, old telephones, all sorts of really neat stuff, maps, just about anything you could want, lots of old treasures there. So it's a great way to spend a Sunday. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So, one thing when we were writing this book, we really wanted to make it accessible for all ages and include a lot of things, not only for adults, but for families and kids as well. So one place which actually they opened, it took them a while to reopen after the pandemic, but they are back open now, is A4Cade. And they are a combination restaurant and arcade, as the name might suggest. So I'll just share the chapter with you. What's better than a dimly lit emporium of retro video and pinball games? A dimly lit emporium of retro video and pinball games that serves grilled cheese sandwiches and cocktails. At Central Square's A4Cade, the joint effort of beloved local restaurants, Area 4 and Roxy's Grilled Cheese, nostalgia and kitsch are baked into every part of the experience, whether it's the Pac-Man machine or a cheeky Mario-inspired tiki drink called Princess Peach's Downfall. There's also an impressive selection of craft beers from area breweries and wines by the glass if you absolutely insist on acting like a grown-up. Roxy's renowned grilled cheese sandwiches and burgers, which were born from a food truck, are the other stars of the show. This isn't your average craft singles affair. Rather, you'll find dressed up takes like the mighty rib melt with a 3-cheese blend, caramelized onions and braised barbecue short rib, or the green Munster melt, which combines North Country bacon and house-made guacamole. And it wouldn't be a proper party without classic burgers and hot dogs, though veggie options are also available. If you are wondering, the games operate on the same token system you remember from those carefree days when you'd spend all afternoon furiously trying to defeat the Frogger machine, only to be rewarded with a plastic mood ring. There aren't any prizes here, but there is booze, which more than makes up for it. For an extra dose of childhood happiness, grab a cone of vanilla soft serve or cereal milkshake to sip while playing Mortal Kombat 2 and Galaga. Adding to the jovial atmosphere are near-nightly DJs, spinning live, and frequent events. A4Cade has no pretense or agenda. We just want to do fun stuff, says Roxy's founder and owner, James DiSabatino. From drag trivia to pinball tournaments and Area 51 parties, our vibe is just about having a good time. And it's really a fun place for whether you're on a date or with friends or family. It's a really cool spot. Another one I wanted to talk about is Circus Arts, which is actually basically circus class center for adults and kids. So if you've ever kind of dreamed of running off and joining the circus, this is a pretty good way to start. It's a 5,000 square foot training center that basically has classes in everything from clowning and juggling to tightrope walking and aerial arts with the silks and ropes. And as I mentioned, they have classes for all ages. So it's just a really unique category of school if you're looking for a new class to try. There's also the Lars Anderson Auto Museum, which is one of my favorites. I've been to car shows there. They have an annual Transporter Fest that is all the Volkswagen, Beetles, and vans from the 60s and 70s. But I never really knew until I wrote the book, the history of the museum. And it began actually as a personal collection of a couple, Lars and Isabel Anderson. They were two wealthy socialites who would show off their 32 fancy cars to their friends who would come to visit on the weekends. And when Isabel, the wife, died, she requested that their collection be donated to the Veteran Motor Car Club of America, who then established the museum in Lars's name. And among the vehicles on display are a 1926 Lincoln, there's a 1907 Fiat, and then a 1925 Luxor taxi, among a lot of other cool cars. And the outside of it, if you've ever seen it, it looks like a huge castle. And it's so impressive because it was actually designed by the city architect at the time, Edmund M. Wheelwright, who he also designed the Boston Opera House, the Harvard Lampoon building, which, as I mentioned, is also in the book. As I mentioned, they host frequent kind of cars and coffee events on the lawn outside, Transporter Fest, as well as kind of highlighting different makes and models of cars. Okay, and we can move on to the next slide. Yeah. So if you're looking for something a little different than maybe just your average restaurant and dinner and movie, a lot of these are variations on dinner and movie, but they're more unique. So Casa Portugal is one restaurant that I want to talk about because, believe it or not, Massachusetts has the largest population of people with Portuguese ancestry in the entire country. And this restaurant has been around since 1976. It's kind of small and no frills, but if you're looking for authentic Portuguese cooking, it's a very kind of cozy environment. They have the country's specialty bacalhau, which is a codfish dish, and it's just a really authentic, great place to eat. There's also the Coolidge After Dark, the Coolidge Corner Theater, and they've recently brought these back, their midnight screenings, and I will give the chapter to you because they have an interesting history as well. Sure, you can catch a plain old matinee at the beloved nonprofit indie cinema in Brookline, but there's something undeniably exciting, vaguely dangerous, and a bit romantic about the Coolidge after midnight showings of cult classics like The Room and Reefer Madness. In this buzzy environment, it's not only acceptable to shout lines at the screen, it's encouraged. The history of the Coolidge dates back to 1933, when the former Beacon Universalist Church was given new life as a 1,500-seat Art Deco theater during the Great Depression. It was a hard-fought battle to reach this point, as the town of Brookline feared that the introduction of movies into the neighborhood would be an unsavory influence on the area's youth, the kissing and candy smuggling horror. However, in the 1970s, the emerging popularity of mall cinemas forced the theater to differentiate itself from run-of-the-mill multiplexes. Justin Fried took charge in 1977, reimagining the theater as an art house concept that ran revivals and classics along with new releases. Ever since, it has remained a community cornerstone, featuring a mix of blockbusters, film festival fare, and more obscure hidden gems, weathering many financial crises and even a brush with death in the late 1980s, as the building was threatened with demolition. Through the efforts of locals and the dedicated staff, the theater's not only survived, but thrived, expanding its programming and renovating the historic space. In addition to movies, the Coolidge hosts numerous special events, hosting greats like Dennis Hopper and Norman Mailer, plus celebrities including Jacob Dylan and Julianne Moore. The late night program in particular, according to the Coolidge, focuses on the horrifying, weird, camp, avant-garde, tripped out, and cults. So even buffs of the most bizarre movies may find themselves discovering a new favorite on 35mm film. And so, yeah, that's if you're a night owl and can stay up past midnight, which I cannot, they have great midnight showings there. There's also Films at the Gate in Chinatown. Obviously, there's no shortage of outdoor movies during the summer in Boston, but this one's especially cool. It's hosted by the neighborhood, by the Chinatown Association, and you can grab takeout from any number of the restaurants there. And it's hosted in a kind of vacant parking lot, but they show a different kung fu movie every time they do it. I don't think it's weekly, but they do it at least a few times during every summer. And it's just a really kind of fun outdoor movie experience there. And then finally, Wally's Jazz Club, which just finally reopened, thankfully, or is reopening maybe this week. It's really truly one of the last spots to see live jazz in Boston, and it's among the oldest of its kind in the country. Joseph Walcott, who is an immigrant from Barbados, he started the club. He was the first Black nightclub owner in New England, and it remains the oldest family-owned club in New England, as his children and grandchildren have continued to manage it since his passing. And besides serving as a stage for incredible musicians like Billie Holiday, Art Blakey, Charlie Parker, Wally's has always been committed to nurturing up-and-coming student musicians from both nearby Berkeley and the New England Conservatory of Music. So they definitely will feature student musicians on stage. And if you've never been, it's an incredible experience. It's very intimate. It's very bare bones, but the focus is all on the music. And it's just a wonderful place to spend an evening. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, and while a lot of the places in the book are in Boston proper, we kind of took some liberties with the 111 places in Boston title and did focus on a few that were out in the suburbs a little bit. And one of them in Newton is Echo Bridge, which I had actually never heard of before we did research to find places for the book. But it's a really, really neat place, and I'll explain why. Practice your best Ricola yodel before stepping out onto the platform underneath this beautiful masonry arch, which was built in 1877 by Boston Waterworks. True to its namesake, you'll hear up to 15 reverberations back after they ring out across the banks of the Charles River. Though no one can definitively pinpoint the reason for this phenomenon, there are a few pretty plausible theories. The most popular explanation is that the echoes are the results of sound bouncing between the bridge and the water, though it's also been suggested that the noise is funneled through the bridge's arc, similar to the effect that can be observed in the arches at Manhattan's Grand Central Terminal. Others, like Arthur Tabor Jones, believe that it might be a combination of the two. In his study conducted for the Journal, surprise is an actual thing, he sought to get to the bottom of it with mixed results, literally, as both ideas seem to be true. No matter what's behind it, one thing is for certain, there's nothing else like it around. Musicians have even been known to set up shop on the platform and have jam sessions to take advantage of the excellent acoustics and marvel at an anomaly that's just plain cool. In addition to the amazing sonic spectacle, the bridge is a visual beauty to behold, spanning 500 feet between the towns of Needham and Newton. There are 7 arches in all, along with postcard perfect views of the Hemlock Gorge, a waterfall, and old mill buildings in the distance. Within the gorge, there are a number of walking trails ideal for getting lost on a Sunday afternoon. Keep your eyes peeled for ruins of a 19th century mill that was once powered by the river. The bridge is a part of the Sudbury Aqueduct and connects Framingham's Sudbury Reservoir and the Chestnut Hill Reservoir. And while it once carried water throughout the Boston metro area, the aqueduct hasn't been functional since the 50s. So it's just a really cool kind of acoustic anomaly, and just a beautiful place to go to walk around. And then You Do It Electronics is one that Heather was particularly passionate about, being a visual artist that does installations, and she really had wanted to feature it in the book. It's a huge electronics superstore in Needham that's been there for more than 70 years, I believe. It has kind of all sorts of gadgets, gizmos, and even if you're not particularly handy or aren't super savvy when it comes to technology, it's worth it to browse around simply to see the amazing selection, and the employees there kind of know a little bit about everything. If you're building some sort of device, it's just a great place to get lost for an hour or two. Okay, we can move on to the last. So of course, even though we had 111 places, which does seem like a lot, there were, for various reasons, spots we couldn't include. One of the things we prioritized, and the publisher of these books prioritizes, is having a well-rounded balance of places. So didn't want to have too many restaurants, didn't want to have too many shops, and kind of wanted a mix of outdoor spots, monuments, and we were really focused on finding interesting stories that we could tell about places. So sadly, I think we had too many parks, but the one featured here in the picture is Norman B. Leventhal Park, which is my favorite. I think it's a hidden gem in the city. It's in the financial district, I think Milk and Congress Street, I believe. And when I worked downtown, I would go there all the time. At lunch, it's very serene. It's truly an oasis in the middle of the city. And I'm hoping we can include it in a future edition, because I feel like, unless you live or work right around there, most tourists and people visiting wouldn't really know to check it out. And then just to go back to the top, Chez Vu, is a roller skating rink that's been in Mattapan for a very long time. They also just reopened. And it's really, I think, the last roller skating rink, definitely in Metro Boston. And, it's just a really special place, and they have lessons and everything there. Mirabella Pool is another one that is in the North End. I actually lived in the North End for 2 years and didn't know about it until I almost moved out of the North End. That's how hidden gem it is. It's up basically towards Charlestown, like up by the water. And so you have a beautiful view from it. It's a favorite among locals. It's because it's a public pool. Visitors can purchase a guest pass for the day. But it's a really truly like the definition of a hidden gem. And then finally, one that we didn't include because it wasn't a place, was wild turkeys. I don't know, depending on where you live. At least when I lived in JP, there were tons of turkeys just walking around all the time. When we were floating the idea of including this idea or this, as a place in the book, we got lots of stories about people's run-ins with turkeys, and it kind of became a running joke. And we obviously just didn't end up including it. There wasn't enough there to work with, but it was just kind of a funny anecdote about the Boston area. So I believe that is it. I think that's the end. Thank you so much.
Okay, we're back. And I'm just going to reset my thing and ask you some questions while we wait for people to put questions in the Q&A. Would you mind talking a little bit about how you and Heather met again?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Mina and I were discussing this before the beginning of the presentation, but it was very interesting because I actually applied to write this book. They look for locals as part of this guidebook series to really get a more authentic and local perspective. But we had to each write a sample presentation with sample chapters, explain why we were the right person to write the book. And to be honest, I kind of forgot that I had sent it in, and I received an email from Karen, who was our editor. And she said, I loved your proposal, but I have an equally strong one. So would you like to either kind of compete to decide who gets to write the book, or do you want to work together on it? And I figured if someone was willing to put in all the work to do the proposal, that I could probably work with them and trust them. And Heather felt the same way, thankfully. So we both decided to work together instead of just having one of us do it. And it ended up working out really well. We didn't actually meet in person until we signed the contract at late 2019. I think it was the day before New Year's Eve, 2019. And so we were able to, when we wrote the book, largely during the height of the pandemic, communicate online, and we kind of divided and conquered the chapters. But she was a great co-author, and I think our writing styles meshed pretty well together. So it worked out really well.
That's really fun. It must have been fun to be able to go to some of those places with somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as I mentioned, we weren't able to go to a lot of the places when we were actually writing it, but we've tried to hit up all of the places that and a lot of them we did know about, and that's why we suggested them for the list, and we were familiar with them. But we did make an effort to get to as many as we could that we weren't able to visit prior to writing the book. So
how many places did you have on your list before you had to cull it down to 111?
We actually didn't have that many more. I don't think. We had maybe 10 more places. And we wanted to keep a few in our back pocket for in case we need to replace them, which we did have to make some updates before the book actually came out. But overall it was less so, maybe because Boston's such a small city and we were looking for very specific types of things, but it was actually fewer than I expected to have, for that many places. So not a ton of extras.
Well, that's good then. The culling process wasn't so awful.
It wasn't, and it was, but I will say a lot of the process was the publisher of this series. The publisher is headquartered in Germany, and it's run by a guy who's very hands-on with all the books, and he wants to look at the list and approve it and make sure, as I mentioned, that everything's balanced and there's a mix of places. And so really getting that ratio right took a while in terms of replacing categories and things that we need to own more parks or less parks or things like that. So that was an unexpected challenge that we were not really expecting or didn't really think about when we were forming the list. So
Mary asked, where is Sowell Market?
So Sowell Market is right in the south end. Excuse me, there's a siren. Ambulance driving by. It's in the south end. I believe it's south of Washington. It's Washington Street in the south end, and it's on Sundays. It's not all year. The outdoor market's not all year round, but the vintage market, I believe, is all year. So
I have to get to that. I love vintage as well.
It's great. Yeah, it's my favorite.
In relation to that, Anna asks if there are addresses for all of the places in the book.
There are. There's addresses where applicable, websites, phone numbers, and then we also include, which I really enjoy, a related tip that's a local, either a place that's nearby to the chapter or a place that's related topic-wise to it. So, while you're in the area, or if you're interested in this thing, you'll want to check out this place as well. So it's kind of it's actually, double the amount of places really, but we just give a little quick nod to another place in it.
Oh, wow. And Eva Jane says, what's the story about the Italian donkey? I think it was number 62 on the weirdest thing slide. Yes,
the Italian donkey is a very interesting and very weird story. Basically, hold on, I had written notes about this because Heather did write this chapter, but I've become familiar with it. So a man named Roger Webb, he went on vacation in the 90s to Florence, Italy, and he wanted a souvenir that would commemorate his time there. And for some reason, he came across a bronze donkey sculpture that he thought he wanted, and so he somehow transported it back to Boston, and he wanted to donate it to the city of Boston for no good reason besides he just wanted to have his own monument, I guess. And they were obviously less enthused and said no. So he enlisted the help of his cousin, who was a sculptor, to kind of dress it up a bit and add there's bronze footprints in front of the statue, and he made up a story basically convincing the city officials that the donkey reflected the city's long history of electing democratic leaders. So he kind of loosely, it was a stretch, but it worked. It convinced them, and so there the donkey stands today. It's really just because of one guy's crazy idea, which is really pretty funny, and that's one of the better examples of the stories we learned, doing research for this book, because usually it has a more historical significance or something, more official. But this was a random man that went on vacation and brought back a donkey statue. But it makes for good photo ops.
Definitely. And what is the name of the series that you wrote your book for?
So it's actually called 111 Places, and they do them all around the world. And the reasoning for 111 is pretty interesting. It's, as I mentioned, the publisher is located in Germany, and 11 is a very lucky number for them there. They have it's like a festival basically, that everything's at 1111, and it's like a good luck number for them there. And so, but they thought, 11 places isn't enough. 1111's too many, so 111 places was kind of a meeting in the middle, but yeah, it was kind of cool.
Can you imagine having to find 1111 over 1,000 places?
That would be, I think that'd be overwhelming for everyone involved, including the readers. So I think they made the right decision in keeping it to 111.
So what was the most surprising thing you learned?
It's a good question. I mean, there was a lot, but I think the one that always stands out to me, which I didn't talk about here, is there's a few different Viking memorials around the city that have no basis in actual history. Kind of, again, it was because a guy believed that the Vikings landed here and erected, statues and monuments. He said like Leif Erikson was here, when there's no actual proof of it, no documentation of it. But everyone just kind of went along with it. This guy was very convincing. And I think it's things like that that are just really interesting and really funny, because they're still all, you can go visit them today, and it's all completely speculation and potentially fictional history. So
so Patricia says, does the Langham Hotel still have the chocolate bar, which I think was on your list?
it was when we wanted to include it, they were, I believe, doing renovations, or so they had temporarily closed it. I'll have to check on, it might be back now, but I'm not sure if they've gotten rid of it completely or not. But I know when we were preparing the book for publication and wanted to include it, we had called them and they said it was at least temporarily closed, sadly. So, but I have been before, and if it's still open or if it's reopened, I would definitely recommend it.
So yeah, I mean, and related to that, where you said that you had to make some changes to the book before it came out, was that because things closed due to the pandemic, or just closed, or?
Yeah. And I think as I was telling you, I think before we started, we were thankful that a lot of the places were not businesses, that they were either parks or outdoor spots that we didn't have to worry about. So in that sense, there were fewer than expected. I think there were only a couple, and I'm struggling to remember even what they were now, that we had to replace, that had closed or were still closed, and we were very uncertain. We tried to kind of include places that we thought might be reopening shortly after the publication, but there were a few that we just couldn't get in touch with anyone, and we said, okay, maybe this is gone for good, sadly. So yeah, that was definitely a last minute challenge, but it's an ongoing challenge with updating the books. We want to keep it current, and we just had the second edition come out, and we had to already replace a few more. So yeah.
Was it hard to find places that were off the beaten path? Because Boston is so well known. I mean, some of these cities are so well known.
Yep. Yeah, it definitely was, especially for such a small city. And even kind of the initial places that we thought of as hidden gems, I talked to friends or family or trying to get ideas, and they were like, oh yeah, like I know about that. And so it was definitely a little bit of a challenge in that sense, but also Karen, who's worked on these books before, was really helpful in helping us frame some of the different places in terms of, like, say, the Museum of Fine Arts. Instead of just the museum wouldn't be a hidden gem anyway, but she said, oh, if you can find an interesting exhibit there, like we did the giant baby heads, so find one thing in a bigger place that has an interesting story or a cool story behind it, and that made it a little easier in terms of conceptualizing it, because there are a lot of bigger places with cool side stories to them when you look a little deeper. So
I'm curious about those stories though, because once you actually found the places, then did you do the research, or was it like a half and half thing?
I mean, as I mentioned, Heather and I kind of divided and conquered the chapters, and that kind of included doing all the research and legwork to talk to the people there and write the chapter. So yeah, I think, and it's really been since the publication and in reviewing our galleys and things like that process, that we've become really familiar with the places that the other person wrote about, even though we knew the whole list. But I think you just kind of reading it over and over too, we learned what the other person wrote about pretty quickly. So
And did you guys split the chapters evenly? Like, yeah. And then
Yeah,
did you have a photographer? She must have taken pictures of every place.
she did every place. So she had her work cut out for her. And that was another, she like went above and beyond with her creativity in terms of, there were some places that, if they were closed, we had to come up with something to make it work. Or for the North End bocce courts, they were under construction, being renovated. It wasn't going to be open in time for her to get the photos. So she kind of staged holding a bowl of, a bucket of bocce balls as a close-up to represent that. So there were a few things like that where she had to really improvise and get creative with how we were going to show this because of whatever constraints were happening. So yeah, she really came through. That was great.
And so this is an interesting question because this attendee does not have a car. So they're thinking about places that are close to T stops. And do you have like a few places that you would recommend because they're close to public transportation?
Yeah, let me just, because we did do at some point we had a list of places that were on the T. Just 1 second. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that was another actually priority that we had, was to focus on spots that were easily accessible by public transportation too. So let me see. In terms of being near T stops, there's the Church of the Covenant, which has Tiffany glass, is beautiful to visit. And I believe they're doing tours again. The Maparium, which you may have heard of, but it has, probably seen pictures, like the beautiful colored kind of a globe map ceiling. That's right downtown. We have the Puppet Free Library, which is, that was a cool one. It's a small little, basically this woman's workshop where she does these puppets for different parades, and organizations can take them out for events and parades and things like that. And it's like located in this alley, not too far from Church of the Covenant, like off of Newbury Street. And that's really neat. Tremont Temple, which that's right on Tremont Street. And it's a church, but it's where Charles Dickens did the first public reading of A Christmas Carol, and it's rumored to be haunted by him. And let me see, one more. In the fake Viking memorials that I mentioned, there's one on the Commonwealth Avenue Mall downtown, and then the Sargent Gallery at the Boston Public Library, John Singer Sargent's murals. You can go visit them there. So yeah, we tried to focus on places that were T accessible in general, or at least by bus or train. So yeah, there's plenty of spots downtown in the book.
So what's up next for you? What can we expect from you and or Heather?
It's a good question. I mentioned we're thinking about possibly doing another 111 book, maybe focused on walks in the city, like different walking routes, since Boston is such a walkable city. And I think we're both big walkers, so we have a few routes in mind already to talk about, like places to visit along the way. But I know that Heather is also focused on, as I mentioned, she's a visual artist and does installations and stuff. So this was, I think, more of a passion project as a local for her. And I'm a full-time writer, so I'm not sure what the next project is, but I do freelance and things like that. But this is my first foray into the book world, so we'll see.
Well, it's an excellent one. So where would you recommend that we get the book? Obviously we can get it from the library, but the best place to buy it do you have a website?
Yeah, so if you let me double check that I'm getting the address right. I think it's called bookshop. Let's see,
bookshop.org.
I think it's bookshop, yeah, bookshop.org, yeah, because what it does is you can look up the book there and it'll populate your local bookstores that have it, or you can order it from them just to, support your local bookstores, or I'm always in support of that. So I think that that's probably the best way to do it, if not the library.
And one last question from Anna. Have you considered writing fiction based on the stories you learned about Boston?
I actually haven't, but that's a really good idea, actually. I feel like I'm not very good at writing fiction. I'm better at writing about things I know, or actual, factual things, but there are definitely plenty of stories that could spark some creativity there. So maybe.
Well, we will keep an eye out for that as well. So thank you so much, Kim. This has been fascinating. I really appreciate everybody who came and spent their afternoon with us as well. And I will send out a recap with the video link and everything, but I hope you go traveling around Boston and finding these awesome places that we've heard about today.
So thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Mina.
You're welcome. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Happy travels.